Hey, I'm Alex Ratcliffe from Board Game Co., and today I'm reviewing For Glory. Designed by Alex Wolf, published by Spielcraft Games, this is a two-player head-to-head deck builder with a gladiatorial theme, which you're going to be going back and forth until one player eventually earns enough glory to win the game. And if you think that a two-player head-to-head deck building game for a game you may or may not have heard of sounds like a crowded genre, I thought exactly the same thing. In fact, when Spielcraft Games reached out to me asking me if I'd like to review the game, I looked into it, I saw it, I took a look, and then I replied verbatim. I'm reading this from my little note card there. I said, I'm happy to take a look at this one if you'd like. I'm a bit wary that a two-player head-to-head deck building game is able to differentiate itself in a crowded field, but I'm a sucker for deck builders, so I'm happy to find out. I was skeptical of this game, and let's go into the review itself and see. To be clear, I wasn't skeptical that it'd be good. I was skeptical that it would stand out, that it would do enough to differentiate itself, that it would do enough to recommend picking this one up and adding it to your collection. And so let's go into it. Let's talk about the game, how it plays, and of course what I liked, didn't like, and final thoughts and all that. And so the game itself, like I said, is a two-player deck builder. You're going to be drawing 7 cards per round, and I know you're thinking 7 cards. That's more than any deck builder lets me do, and that's true. You do get to do a lot on each of your turns in this game. From there, you're going to follow your incredibly well-designed player aids that cover basically everything you need to know. There are 2 phases in this game. It's going to represent your board, where you put cards around. You can ultimately start putting your decks on here once you know the phases, but initially it will be a good guide to guiding you through these steps of the round. Ultimately, you're going to draw your hand and then do stuff with that hand. That's going to involve buying more cards. So perhaps I'm going to spend 4 money to buy this Crooked Senator, adding that to my discard pile. Then from there, I can potentially play a Senator. I have another Senator in my hand, and then I'm going to add a Gladiator to an arena. That is ultimately what your turn is going to play out like every turn. It's going to involve drawing cards, prepping Gladiators to an arena, and then possibly reserving cards. Those are the 3 main actions you're going to be taking, as well as patrons in your villa or whatnot. Past that, you're going to go ahead to discarding your remaining hand, refilling any supply you've filled from, any supply you've played from, and then proceeding to the opposing player's turn, where you're going to go back and forth until you're ready to enter the arena phase. And that's because this game comes with 2 phases. There's the basic setup for each actual arena phase, which is like I just described, and then once you have enough gladiators in their arena, it will trigger the actual arena where you play out the fight itself. And before we get into the arena phase, it's important to note that there are 3 main categories of cards, all of them available with their own unique decks. So there's no complete randomization of having too many or too little of one card. You always have access to 3 cards of each type at the beginning of your turn. There's going to be 3 finance cards. These are going to be patrons who help support your gladiators in the arena, and then more money in terms of building up your deck to have a better, more economical deck. Is going to be your actual gladiators. While you start with 2 gladiators in your deck, you're going to want to get these gladiators both because they are stronger, cooler, have fun abilities, and all that. So you're going to need to buy gladiators to ultimately put them in the arena to have fights. And then finally, my personal favorite is going to be the tactics and reactions deck. This is going to have things that you can play as a reaction to stop damage from happening, to redirect damage, things like that. And then of course tactics, which is going to be dealing 2 damage immediately, exhausting someone's patron, exhausting a gladiator, readying one of your own, doing different things and abilities that your opponent can't see coming. Because gladiators in arena, you can plan around that to a degree. What your opponent has in their hand that they're going to play to mess up your plans, that you can't really plan for. And so you're going to slowly but surely build up your deck. Eventually you're going to get a point where there's enough boast in the arenas to trigger the next combat. This game is going to have an escalating system where the first arena phase is going to be triggered by only having 6 boast. Once that arena phase is done, you'll need 14 for the next, then 19, then 24, then 24. I've never actually had a game go through all 5 rounds, but I have had 4 rounds happen in a game, because ultimately every single arena phase is going to be 3 glory up for grabs. There's going to be 2 glory on one of the arenas over here, and then 1 on each of the others. Now you can only actually play in one of these, so it's only going to come down to 3 glory available in every single round. And you have to get 6 glory to win the game, which means this game can last as few as 2 whole arena phases if you win everything, but more commonly it'll be 3 or 4 arena phases depending on how well or how quickly you take over your opponent. And in those arena phases, what you're going to do is you're going to first of all late register, which is to say that once you measure up the strength of your gladiators and you see if it triggers the boast phase happening and you see if it triggers an actual combat happening, then you'll have an opportunity to play more gladiators from your hand to late register them to different arenas. This is your last chance to get gladiators into that fight. From there, you will start having a battle back and forth, and in each round of battle, you will have an opportunity to attack with a gladiator, exhausting them, and then playing a tactics card or tactics ability in order to do something extra. Then your opponent will take their turn back and forth, taking your combat actions until ultimately you win or lose an arena. That is the core of the game. You're going to have the machinations phase where you build up your deck, build up your gladiators, build up your patrons, your economy, your abilities, prepping itself entirely for an arena phase. And then you'll actually have the arena phase, actually have that battle where you will do ability after ability, attack after attack, back and forth until someone wins or loses. There is going to be a benefit for winning the arena phases in terms of getting both the glory as well as additional abilities that you can then utilize in the next arena phase to become even stronger and more powerful in this game. That is basically for glory. And it's okay. It sounds okay, at least. I mean, I read the rules, I prepped for the game, and I maintained that thought process the entire time of, I'm sure this will be fine. But I actually like this game far more than I thought I would. I thought it would be okay, a game that I can recommend while not keeping for myself in my collection. But I have really been enjoying this game. And to begin with, as I said already, directly to them when they offered it, I like deck building, and so I tend to be a sucker for that mechanic. I tend to try almost all the deck builders I can get my hands on, although sooner or later they tend to slowly leave as the best ones remain, as the ones that I find most accessible, get to the table, or do something different or special enough that I choose to keep them in my collection. And so deck building is already a pro in its favor. I love the 3 different deck system. While I initially thought it would be an extra degree of tediousness, and it does add to the cleanup as you sort out your cards into each of every different pile, I would say it's no worse than Dominion, where you have to sort out your cards into every single one of 10 different piles, and so it's easier there. But it adds a consistency to the game. It means you're not completely vulnerable to having 5 cards in a card row and you hope for the best. There still is a strong degree, I would say, of being able to tailor and tweak your deck in the direction you want. You want a heavy gladiator deck, you support it with a bunch of patrons, build up an economy, you can do that. You can swarm the field with gladiators and overpower your opponent that way, but not if they have been going incredibly tactics heavy and have counters for every single thing you do, playing abilities. I do 3 damage, boom, I redirect 3 damage, boom, I stop this, I redistribute that, I exhaust your gladiator. The abilities in this game, the tactics and reactions, there's so much you can do with them. And so depending on your playstyle, whether it's economy, whether it's pure might, whether it's abilities, there are all sorts of different ways you can adjust and build your deck, both as your own personal preference, as well as reacting to what your opponent is doing, as well as reacting to the gladiators they are picking, the tactics they are grabbing, because there is very much a two-player back and forth in this game in which you see how they are building up their deck and you respond accordingly. And so I love the accessibility and degree of choice that the 3 deck system gives you, even if it does add to the table space and a drop to the maintenance itself. I really enjoy the patron gladiator management in this game, and this is something I didn't heavily touch upon before, but each gladiator, or most of the gladiators, not all of them, most of the gladiators will come with between 1 and 2 symbols on them that represent how much support they need from patrons to keep them in their arena, because gladiators, after all, they're high maintenance, they're expensive, maintaining their armor, their training, their whatever, they need someone to actually pay the bills, and so you need to acquire patrons and have at least enough patron support as the gladiators you have in your arena, and so that provides a double management aspect to the game. Because sure, gladiators themselves, they last multiple rounds, whereas an ability card just lasts once and then it's gone for the rest of the combat. But the gladiators, on the other hand, require you to build up 2 aspects of your deck simultaneously, whereas the abilities require far less focus. And so I love that management, the double aspect management to building up your gladiators. I love, and you know this one already, I love the powers and abilities, and not just on the tactics and reactions. The abilities in this game from the gladiators, each gladiator, I say most gladiators, come to the table with some sort of extra that makes them fun. When this gladiator attacks, he exhausts your gladiator. When this gladiator attacks, he can redistribute his damage however you want. When this gladiator is exhausted, he can only take 1 damage at a time, even if you were dealing 17 in one shot, which is hard, but theoretically possible, you would still only take 1 damage from that gladiator. When this gladiator is exhausted, he protects the other gladiators. When this gladiator dies, he deals 2 damage on the way out. Each gladiator comes to the table with a different ability, a different thing that makes them fun and interesting to play, and they're so much fun to buy them. And the ones that do the most fun things, those require more patron support and, of course, initial cost to get them into your deck, but they can be so rewarding and so much fun when you look at your opponent's face as they realize you have a whole host of gladiators here that they have to somehow figure out how to deal with when that arena phase triggers. And then, of course, that's just the gladiators themselves. But more than that, the abilities themselves on the tactics and reactions do more of that. Now, most of them will come down to either doing damage, preventing damage, or redirecting damage. But there will still be many in there that are clever, that are different, that do slightly different things. Redistribute damage you took to other players you have. Give all your gladiators +1 strength, all of them +1 defense. Different things that will adjust how the game plays, and playing them when your opponent can't possibly know exactly what to expect. Well, that's the fun of powers and abilities. And then lastly, because we're not done yet, lastly, the patrons themselves. One of the reasons I actually like the patron system, one of the reasons I don't find it just a tedious extra step of maintenance, is because most of the patrons come with abilities as well. So it's not purely an aspect of, well, I have to get this to support that, adding another level of maintenance to the game. Rather, the patrons often come with abilities. Perhaps you can exhaust the patron to deal 1 damage. Perhaps this patron makes you go faster, makes you get the initiative faster. Perhaps that patron gives you a discount on tactics cards. So many different options on those patrons, leading to 3 different unique decks, all with powers and abilities, giving you different ways to play out the game. And we're not done yet, because lastly, the arena deck. You have a whole host of arena cards in this game. Despite the fact that you only go through a few rounds of combat, there are so many different arena cards, each with their own different ability. And when you win those arenas, you will get that ability as well for the next fight. So lots of powers and abilities. And before we go on to things I didn't like, I do want to talk about this player aid, because they did an amazing job with this player aid. They really run you through every single step clearly and concisely in terms of how the steps play out. Now, don't get me wrong, the game is not so complicated that you really need it after that first play, but in case you're finding the sequencing a little harder to follow, which can happen, because at the end of the day, a deck builder with 2 distinct phases going back and forth is a little bit unique. Nonetheless, you can look at your player aid and see exactly how it plays out. It is incredibly clear, incredibly concise, and when you're done with it and don't need it anymore, you can just put your deck and discard pile there instead of putting it on the bottom. So it's not a waste of space either. As far as things I didn't like, there's going to come down to a few things, different small nitpicks. One will be the biggest impact for this game, but the first few are really just, worth noting and all that. And to begin with, the iconography and the table space in this game are not insignificant for the type of game it is. It does require a decent amount of table space. It is set up now here on my smaller table, and it will be functional, but when we get to the later rounds with having multiple gladiators spread on these arenas, we will need more table space. In actuality, I have started, when I've been setting up this game, past our first game when I learned this the hard way, I've taken to setting up the game with a significant gap of actually adding a lot more room so you can get all the gladiators down in the arena without having them overlapping each other harder to read. And what adds to that, unfortunately, is the design of the cards means you need information from both sides of the cards. You can't stagger the cards on top of each other, because you kind of need to see their abilities, their stats, and then how much boast they are contributing to triggering the next arena phase. And the way they designed the cards, they could have hypothetically swapped them. It would have required adjusting a whole bunch of cards, but they could have hypothetically made all the information on the left side, thus allowing you to actually stagger the cards over each other for less of a table space hog. And so that is going to be something worth mentioning for sure. Additionally, subsequent rounds, past the first round, I would say past the second round even, I found in this game that subsequent rounds often triggered a rush. You see, when each arena phase is over, you will clear all the gladiators, you will put them into your discard pile, they will enter your deck, and then they have to come back out again until they trigger the next arena phase, which could potentially add downtime until the next arena phase, and the additional gap in how much boast is needed does add to that. So it goes from 6 to 14 to 19 to 24, and so that does help. But in practice, and this could be because I very much weed my deck, I take a culling deck approach to every single game I play, which means I was often only had 7 to 15 cards in my deck, which as soon as you add 6, 7 gladiators to that pool, they will come back right away. And so very often in our games, we would have a rush where the gladiators re-entered the system much quicker than they should have otherwise. And additionally, that same aspect leads to culling of your deck being a more important strategy than I think it could have otherwise been. I think it is almost essential, because you are almost guaranteed to get all your gladiators on the table by the next fight, whereas your opponent, if they haven't culled their deck, they may still have cards sitting in there. So that culling aspect and the triggering of the next fight a little faster than I would like, it still works, still fine, still enjoy the game, but definitely something that I would have liked to see done a little bit differently perhaps. The patron tenseness of managing 2 different economies, as much as I like the system because of the abilities they have and the double aspect of managing it, I didn't find it as tense as I would have liked. I don't know how to potentially adjust that, but rare were the times where you actually had to worry about a patron being exhausted to remove someone else's gladiator or something else like that happening. It's an extra step, it does its job fine, but I would have potentially liked it to be a bit more tense, although I don't have any good ideas of how to actually implement. And then lastly, and this is the only one that really matters in terms of longevity in my collection of where I see For Glory being 6, 9, 12 months down the road, is the game does run a little longer than I would ideally like. It comes in, and the game, don't get me wrong, the box is rated for 60 to 90 minutes, and that is accurate. It comes in at 60 to 90 minutes, but I would say it drifted closer to that 90 minutes on a regular basis, and it could be that when we've played it 10, 11, 12 times, it'll get to a point where it's closer to 60, but I would say ideally I would like this game to cap out at 60, and it consistently ran to around 90 minutes, which for the play experience is giving. Sometimes I think at that point, maybe I'll pick a different two-player head-to-head game instead, and so that would be the biggest thing that potentially inhibits its longevity long-term. As far as what I can see others not liking, I don't have any firm things that I didn't already cover in my own categories. Perhaps the artwork is okay. It's not particularly amazing. It's not bad either. It does its job, doesn't push me off, doesn't pull me in. It works for the theme in terms of itself, but don't really have much else in that category. As far as my final thoughts on For Glory, like I said already, I walked into this game expecting to be, okay, it's a fine game, check it out, add it to your collection, do what you want with it. But as it stands, I like it a lot more than I thought I would initially. The game actually has, mainly because of the abilities, mainly because of all the things it lets you do every single round, and the fun of drawing a new gladiator and being like, oh, this one, I want this one. This one is, I've been waiting for this gladiator to show up. And there are, mechanics to weeding cards faster to get to the cards you want and stuff like that. But ultimately, the game is a lot more rewarding than I initially thought. I walked in expecting to be okay with it, and for right now, this is 100% staying in my collection. As far as longevity, and this is a fun one. For longevity, I would have pegged this as, I like it a lot right now, but I don't know what it'll be in a year. I don't know if it'll continuously pull out. As much as I'm enjoying it, maybe expansions will help keep it fresh, but we've played it enough times because of how much we've liked it that I've seen all the cards, I've done all the stuff. And it's fun every single time, but it still is to a degree the same game. Slight differences in the way it plays out because of those powers and abilities, but I don't know how it would play out in 6 to 12 months down the road. But it will be staying in my collection for quite some time, at least as of now, because my wife has basically tried to get this in her top 10 games. While I like this game more than I thought I would, she likes the game far more than I do even then. So this one probably will be staying around for a long time. In fact, she has a video coming out shortly, her top 10 games. We filmed that a few weeks ago, but it should be coming up, I don't know exactly when, but this will be sort of on that list. We'll see how that plays out. Past that, this is a game that I do recommend. It reminds me a bit of Omen. If you haven't played Omen a long time ago, I played that ages ago. The feel it gives me it is similar while being a better game, at least for myself, because I like deck building as a mechanic significantly more. Ultimately, that's my review of For Glory, a two-player head-to-head deck building game of gladiatorial combat with unique decks, powers, and abilities, and enough things done differently and enough things done well that I do recommend adding this one to your collection. Until next time, I'm Alex Radcliffe from Board Game Co., and I hope you have a good one.